This is lecture number 2, Early Egypt, the Old Kingdom. Okay, so we've learned about civilizations developing along river valleys like the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Mesopotamia region of the Fertile Crescent. Well, early civilizations also emerged along the Nile River in East Africa. You probably remember learning about the Egyptians way back in middle school. So today will basically be a refresher for you. Just as Mesopotamia became united by powerful leaders in various empires like Hammurabi and Babylon, so too will we see this in Egypt along the Nile River. The Nile River stretches over 4,100 miles, and it is the longest river in the world. Civilizations popped up all along this 4,100-mile stretch of land surrounding the river. So you have to imagine the diversity that existed from one part to another. I mean, have you ever traveled to the west coast of the USA? There is a very different way of life there than here in Rochester. And believe me, having grown up on the west coast, I can attest to this. So yes, you have to imagine that the culture in northern Egypt was very different from the culture in southern Egypt. Anyway, the Nile flooded each year, leaving behind the rich and fertile mud called silt. These deposits allowed for mass farming for food surpluses. Because if you're always worried about where your next meal is coming from, you're not going to be concerning yourselves with things like pottery or other forms of art. Yep, and that's right, leading to civilizations. Unlike the flooding along the Tigris and Euphrates, which was often unpredictable, inundating villages and often drowning people, well, no, the Nile was far more predictable and less vicious. However, the Nile situation wasn't perfect. If the water level was too far below normal, drought occurred, and people starved to death. If the river was higher than usual because of excessive rain, crops were overwatered and ruined. And yes, people starved to death. And finally, because the Nile is surrounded on both sides by deserts, there wasn't a whole lot of cultural diffusion taking place, although it did keep out pesky invaders for a time. Now, before you start thinking that cultural diffusion was happening up and down the Nile, nope, not the case. Let me explain. The Nile flows from south to north, unlike most rivers in the world. Anyone know why we Rochesterians are similar to the Egyptians? Yep, the mighty Genesee River flows north as well. Ooh, aren't we lucky? Anyway, Upper Egypt refers to the south of the Nile, whereas Lower Egypt refers to the Nile region in the north of Egypt. You'd think it was the opposite, but it's because of the direction the Nile flows, okay? Right. Well, traveling by boat up and down the Nile has been difficult throughout history because of these pesky features called cataracts. No, not the eye types of cataracts, although those are pretty pesky for millions of people around the globe. No, cataracts in rivers are churning rapids and waterfalls. Now, you have already learned that many rivers in Africa are cataract-ridden. Much of what we call Egyptian early history occurred north of the first cataract along the Nile and went all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. The most populated parts of the Nile civilization were located there in what was called Lower Egypt, near the Mediterranean along the Nile Delta. Okay, so let's talk about how Egypt became an empire. There used to be two separate kingdoms in Egypt, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. Eventually, someone united these kingdoms into one massive kingdom. Now, some people think that the king who made this happen was the mythical Scorpion King. Others think it was a king named Narmer, who donned a hat that appeared to show the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. So Malloy is inclined to think that Narmer made this happen. Most historians believe that this unification happened around 3000 BC. Historians divide Egypt's early history into 3 different periods of time. The Old Kingdom, which I'm going to focus on today, was from around 2660 BC to 2180 BC, and it was followed by the Middle Kingdom from 2040 to 1640 BC. Ooh, well, why the gap between the Old and Middle Kingdoms? Well, that might imply that some other group of people took over or had control during that time. The New Kingdom of Egypt took place between 1570 BC to 1075 BC. And yes, the gaps between the Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom imply perhaps that someone else was in control during those periods of time. Okay, so most of what you learned about Egypt back in 6th grade was from the Old Kingdom of Egypt. This was when all the pyramids were built. Pharaohs were those godlike leaders who ruled over Egypt, who established theocracies, which, a theocracy is a system of government based on religious rule. Well, pharaohs were buried in tombs within pyramids, those dome-shaped complex structures. The pyramids are evidence of advanced engineering skills, not unlike the construction of ziggurat temple structures in Mesopotamia, remember? And remember the Tower of Babel and all that? Right, so along with sharing advanced engineering skills like other early river civilizations, Egypt also had other characteristics of an early river culture. They had complex belief systems. The Egyptians were polytheistic, meaning they worshipped many gods. There is evidence that they had over 2,000 deities or godlike beings. The fact that they buried their dead and had elaborate tombs built for their priests and pharaohs and other high members of society, this also indicates that they believed in some sort of afterlife. Some of their most revered gods or deities included Re, the sun god, as well as Osiris, who was the god of the dead. The Egyptians used a fairly advanced mummification process to preserve the bodies of their pharaohs or other important people in society. Additionally, archaeologists have uncovered ancient Egyptian texts, including a series of writings called the Book of the Dead, which included prayers and other hymns. The ancient Egyptians also used a pictograph-based writing system called hieroglyphics. Egyptians wrote hieroglyphics on both stone tablets and walls, as well as on an early paper made from reeds grown along the Nile. This paper was called papyrus. In 1799, Napoleon's conquering French troops, who we're going to learn about later in Global, discovered a black stone covered in 3 different types of hieroglyphics. This was the Rosetta Stone, and its discovery was instrumental for the eventual deciphering and translation of the ancient hieroglyphic writing system, which was finally cracked in 1822 by a Frenchman named François Champollion. Besides a complex writing system, the ancient Egyptians had an advanced 365-day calendar based upon 12 months. They also had advanced math skills and an organized method for collecting taxes from their people. Their medical breakthroughs were also fairly impressive, including their ability to detect people's heart rates, set bones, as well as they had many different surgical techniques. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, along with the building of pyramids, ended around 2180 BC. Egypt's Middle Kingdom from 2040 to 1640 BC was also a time of powerful pharaohs, minus the pyramid building, of course. They were conquered then by a group of invaders called the Hyksos, who ruled from 1630 to 1523 BC, but more on the Hyksos later. Thanks for listening. Bye.